Hi everyone, I'm going to be talking about the nitrogen cycle today, particularly how nitrogen gets incorporated into the soil. So I'm Callum and I have my assistant Pete here, and we'll both be talking about the nitrogen cycle today. Whenever anyone asks you for a few minutes of your time, and I am asking for that in this video, you should always ask, why should I care about this? And thankfully, nitrogen is a very easy subject to care about. The Earth's atmosphere is 78% nitrogen. It's one of the most abundant elements, but we can't use most of it. Most of it's in a completely unusable form. Plants, if we were to look at their makeup, they're only made up about of 1 to 6% elemental nitrogen, and humans, it's around 3.2% elemental nitrogen. So nowhere near as much as the atmosphere. We mainly use nitrogen. Well, nitrogen can be incorporated into a multitude of compounds, but the ones that I'll be focusing on today are amino acids. And amino acids make up proteins, and proteins do just about everything in the human body. I mean, they give us structure, they signal within and outside of cells, they regulate pathways, they transport components, they allow us to sense and feel the environment around us, they allow us to move, they defend our bodies from outside invaders, they store components and compounds, and a class of proteins called enzymes catalyze almost all the chemical reactions in our body. And without these chemical reactions being catalyzed, we would not be alive. So I'm going to talk about a few ways that nitrogen can be incorporated into the soil, which then the plants can then use to make amino acids and proteins. The first one was a relatively new, and I say relatively within the past few hundred years, new addition to the nitrogen cycle. What I have here on the far right is a factory, and it produces smog and pollution. A component of smog and pollution is nitric oxide, NO. In the atmosphere, nitric oxide will react with oxygen and water within clouds to make nitric acid, which forms acid rain, which then falls into soil. And then within soil, there's something called lime, which is calcium carbonate, which basically acts as a buffer to prevent acidification of the soil. The lime rips the proton off of the nitric acid, which makes nitrate. The nitrate then is freely available for all plants, and I have legumes and grains here as my examples of plants, to take up and to make into amino acids and proteins. The next pathway which nitrogen kind of enters into the soil is through lightning. So nitrogen and oxygen, when lightning occurs, forms nitrate. Lightning provides the energy source. The nitrate falls to the ground in the rainwater. And then this nitrate is freely available for all the plants to take up and to make amino acids and proteins out of. The next way that nitrogen can enter into the soil is through decomposition. So what I have here on the left is my rendition of a random animal, but it can be any animal and any plant. So any living organism composed of organic matter will eventually decompose. The decomposition occurs when the proteins are broken down to amino acids and a few other compounds, but ultimately they end up as ammonium, NH4+. The NH4+ or ammonium is freely taken up by plants and made into amino acids and proteins, and other bacteria can also convert the ammonium to nitrate, which plants can take up and use to make amino acids and proteins. The next kind of route which atmospheric nitrogen can enter into the ground is something called nitrogen fixation. N2 is converted to ammonium by symbiotic bacteria within the roots of legume plants and a few other plants. So legumes some examples of legumes are clover, alfalfa, soybean, and the like. So the ammonium can be freely taken up by the plants to make amino acids and proteins. The last route which nitrogen can enter into the soil is actually new within the past 100 years. The Haber-Bosch process was published in 1910 by Fritz Haber and Carl Bosch. Using fossil fuels as an energy source, they can fuse nitrogen and hydrogen to make ammonium, NH4+. The NH4+ can either be used directly as a fertilizer or converted to nitrate as a fertilizer. This is just an artificial way to make ammonium and nitrate to feed to plants. So the plants take in all these different nitrogen, well, not all these, then ammonium and nitrate from different sources, make amino acids and proteins, and then they're taken up by me and Pete. And so I will use the amino acids and proteins in plants directly to make my own amino acids and proteins, and Pete will eat what eats the plants. So he will indirectly get the amino acids and proteins from these plants. So a quick recap, all nitrogen originally comes from the atmosphere, and all nitrogen will eventually end up back in the atmosphere. They can be fixed by bacteria in legume plants and a few other plants. They can be fixed to fertilizers in factories, but once again, using fossil fuels as an energy source, they can fall to the ground as acid rain due to pollution, and then lightning oxidizes atmospheric nitrogen to nitrate, which the plants can then convert to amino acids and proteins. So just a fun fact to remember, some of the proteins, which are composed of amino acids, which require nitrogen to make, were originally and very indirectly powered by lightning. And then on the flip side, some of our nitrogen is going to indirectly come from nitric acid, which is pollution. So no one's perfect, but we're still trying anyway. So thanks everyone for your time. I hope you learned something. And just remember that nitrogen is exceedingly important.